Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are tuning in, and welcome to the Digital Twin Theory podcast produced by VPH, the Society for In Silico Medicine. As usual, I am Davide Montesarchio, and in this episode, we are diving deep, quite literally, into the heart of medical action. I traveled to Leuven, Belgium, to meet with Professor Geert Meyfroidt, head of the Department of Intensive Care Medicine at the University Hospital of Leuven, and professor at KU Leuven. Good morning, Geert.
Good morning.
Professor Meyfroidt is at the forefront of in silico medicine, exploring how data mining, computer modeling, and AI can transform care for most vulnerable patients, those, of course, in intensive care. So I'm truly excited to share this conversation with you. So let's jump right in. Professor Meyfroidt, in what situation is a patient admitted to intensive care, and which are the clinical parameters that must be closely monitored?
That's a very broad question, and that depends, of course. In general, what we say, or how I try to explain this to a lay public, is that you're in the ICU when your life, or at least vital functions, are in danger. So which means that you're actually becoming dependent on the intensive care unit for your survival. So those are the sickest patients that you can find in any hospital. What we do in these patients, some of these patients just require careful monitoring. You just want to monitor closely in case something goes wrong, and you hope that of course it doesn't, but if it does, you have a plan ready. And that there's a whole wide spectrum up to patients who become completely dependent on machines for their life. Machines can be mechanical ventilators, machines can be syringe pumps with very powerful medications, but machines can also be literally pumps that, for instance, replace the heart or the heart function, oxygenators that replace the lung function. And all these devices, the monitors, the therapeutic devices, the syringe pumps, the other pumps, they produce data. They produce a continuous source of data. Data that were, when I was young and I was still a resident, were available on paper where the nurse would chart and write everything down, and then we would have these nice charts, and we would have to prescribe our drugs on paper as well. But since about 20-25 years, ICUs have computerized, and these data streams are now stored and are available in databases. They're available for retrospective research, but they're also available specifically online for applications to use them.
And traditionally, how were these parameters tracked and managed at the bedside?
Well, the thing is, and it's the case for many hospital information system and also for the hospital information system that is available in the ICU, these systems were actually not built for clinicians, and there still aren't. So systems are based for hospital administrators, for legal reasons, because they improve charting. But even now, even as we speak, the doctors are more on the data input side than on the data output. Of course, we can retrieve data. If I want to check what was the blood pressure yesterday, I can easily check that. What did my colleague write yesterday? I can easily check that. But when it comes to information being available, I have to search for the information. So I go to the bedside, I have to log into the computer and then actively search for the medication or for certain parameters. The computer doesn't present that to me automatically. So it's still, I would say, there's this great paper by Atul Gawande in the New Yorker who once wrote, "Why Doctors Hate Their Computers." We still all hate our computers. We feel that it's still a lot of work to retrieve data from a computer. And literally, if you go to a doctor, for instance, you go to an outpatient clinic, not in the ICU, what you will see is that there's a screen between you and the doctor. You're talking to him, he's not looking at you, he's typing, or at the same time, he's pulling out your lab or your radiology result. And so this screen somehow is literally between you and the doctor. And actually that is also the case in the ICU. Sometimes we have the feeling that the screens are behind us and the patient. And we feel that that should improve, that way of handling data is not the way other parts of society have computerized and now have actually systems in place that make their life easier and that promote human interaction rather than interfering with human interaction. So I think that is the whole quest for systems that we're now looking for that we do not yet have.
And is it because of this that the doctors are more on the input side rather than at the output side of the data that sparked your interest in the massive use of data in the ICU?
To be honest, in the beginning it didn't. To be honest, I evolved towards that vision. In the beginning, I started my research more than 20 years ago. And actually, in the beginning, what I thought was the naive idea that there's some sort of hidden information in the data that doctors would not be aware of, and that somehow, now we use the ironical term, automagically, the computers would sort of pull up all sort of disease patterns that I would not recognize as a doctor, and then new information would come in. That was my initial naive idea. We actually tested that hypothesis because we made several models, for instance, for brain injury, acute kidney injury, for cardiac surgery. And what we found is that it's not better than doctors. I mean, an experienced doctor at the bedside is still very good at pulling out information and making diagnostics. And it's not about beating the doctors. I mean, these systems are not there to beat the doctors. But I evolved towards the idea, as I also evolved as a clinician, that, I mean, when you're a junior doctor, you manage a couple of patients and you can perfectly do that. As you grow more senior, you have to supervise a lot of other doctors, and you have to sometimes process data of tens or maybe even more, 20, 30, 40. When I'm on call, I'm actually responsible for around 60 patients who are critically ill. I don't know which patient is in trouble right now. I have to trust my residents or the people around me to tell me that. And so actually what you would want is a sort of a GPS system that tells you where there's trouble. If I'm at the bedside of a patient, I can beat any computer. I'm a good clinician, I've been trained, I'm very experienced, I can interpret things. I can also know that I don't have to jump to every abnormal result. I have to interpret this in the clinical picture of the patient. When I'm on call and responsible for 4 units and 60 patients, that's maybe where a GPS system that somehow guides me through my unit would be very useful. And also, sometimes I think in the end, the interface that we use now, as I said, is actually requests me to remember the tests that I asked yesterday or last week when the results came in. I mean, it's still a pull position. I have to pull out the information. The system doesn't push me the information that I find useful. When you're driving a car right now, your car does that. Your car says, hey, watch out, there's somebody stopping there. You have a GPS system that tells you this is the road you can take, but there's the alternative road maybe that you can take. We don't have that in the ICU. And that is, I think, what would make our lives easier. And so we sort of switched from trying to create the most accurate models that beat clinicians, which I think, I mean, we can still beat residents, that's for sure. Inexperienced doctors, you can still make a system that can predict certain diseases better than they do. But for the experienced doctor, you don't have to do it. You have to switch to systems that make our lives easier. I mean, a doctor nowadays has so many parameters has to take into account, has administration that they has to take into account. It's just a whole range of stuff that you care about that actually pull you away from the actual interaction with your patient. And we have not succeeded yet in building those systems.
And this thing that you just said brilliantly, that the artificial intelligence does not beat the doctor intelligence. And this is somehow common between many interviews that I've realized. But then what can make your life better? Which kind of data or action? For instance, I suppose that is there at least a technical possibility that a computer model, for instance, can tell you if a patient is going into sepsis, let's make an example, with some time in advance, and how that would help your job?
Of course, people may be shocked, but sometimes there's a couple of hours of delay between a patient going into sepsis and me actually being at the bedside of that patient. Meanwhile, I'm doing other work, and so I sort of have to set my priorities, but I don't know the priorities until I'm actually at the bedside. So these systems would be great, but also a simple thing. I ordered a blood culture yesterday, so I have to go into the computer each time and check, did the result already arrive or not? But wouldn't it be nice if it just pushed it to me, would just say, hey, you know, patient on bed 3, the result just came in. This is the result. And maybe it could actually also suggest the right therapy. I would suggest, based on the resistance pattern in your unit, that these and these antibiotics are maybe most useful, but pay attention, the kidney function is also declining. Maybe you should already adapt to that. I mean, those things are interesting. You want me to pull up the kidney function for you. That it sort of suggests you things in such a way it makes your life easy, and also maybe with what people call nudging, it would stimulate the right behavior. It would stimulate me prescribing the right antibiotic, for instance, in that patient.
And in your opinion, in the current situation, what is more needed or what would help to reach this kind of optimal situation? Is more, let's say, the lack of advanced computer models or the way the informatic infrastructure is dealt in hospital?
So I don't think it's better computer models. And the thing is, right now, I mean, I've been associate editor of intensive care medicine, which is the largest journal specifically for intensive care medicine. And every week would get papers with people who said, I have a database, I build a model, I can now predict whatever. And I was like, so what? I mean, you have a database, you tested it, and the model can do that. You probably hired a mathematician, he made some very advanced model, and your model appeared to be very accurate. There's a brilliant paper by the group of Rotterdam. Davy van de Zande was the first author, and they looked at the technology readiness levels of these models and how do they go. And actually you have several levels of TRL, and so the lowest level is sort of you build a model in a database and you validate it in that database, and that's it. But almost no models in the ICU are beyond that phase. So prospective validation is very rare. You just take it to a new data set. An external data set is already done by some, but really taking it to a new data set prospectively, almost never done. Bedside implementation, never done. Clinical trials, does it actually benefit the patient, the doctor? Never done. So we are not moving on the TRL ladder. We're just sticking to building models in data sets, and so it's become very easy because the data are there, as I said, data are being computerized, so you now hire a computer scientist and that's it. But the next generation computer scientist, it should not be some sort of a brilliant mathematical nerd that we can't talk to. It should be somebody in the unit that you can talk to, somebody who can talk with you and understand your problems. Oh, this is how you work. This is how your workflow is. Interesting, but why don't you do it that? I mean, you're losing a lot of time. This is very inefficient. Why don't you use it that way? So I don't think we need better mathematics. The mathematics is okay, and with artificial intelligence, I think the mathematics will start writing itself. The thing is the user side. We have sort of neglected the user side, and finally acceptance will depend on that. And we are still presenting it to doctors as I did more than 20 years ago. There will be a model that will beat the doctor. And of course you get resistance from doctors because they know how complex the reality of a critically ill patient is. So they know that it's not going to be a computer replacing them. But if I can give them something, for instance, discharge notes, that writes their discharge notes automatically. They just have to check, okay, this is a discharge note, so my next colleagues know. Information transfer from doctor to doctor, make that more efficient. Those things will make our lives better. And that is artificial intelligence, where it should jump in, and it hasn't until now. And there's also this problem with, I mean, you have the really big players on the market, like the Google, Apple. They haven't dived into that, and or IBM, if they have dived into that, it's usually top down. You have some sort of board who then decides, and then you create systems that nobody's waiting for. And bottom up, you have a lot of research groups who do this type of research and who are building their own models, but they sort of miss the leverage to upscale this, to upscale what they are developing. Some of these models are very useful, but they don't get to the next level, next upscale. And there's several smaller startups doing these things now, and some of them will survive and will be very good, some of them won't. But I think this link is somehow this middle layer of, let's say, intermediate scale companies that that can scale this up to a commercial level, because my career will be another 15 years before I retire. I can fill the next 15 years with writing papers that will be highly cited in journals. And then I will have a very happy academic career. But I want the models that we have developed to be at the bedside. I want doctors to use them. And for that, this intermediate scale, this upscaling is necessary. And that is a challenge. 20 years ago, the challenge was, how will I sell my papers to journals? Because nobody wanted to publish these papers. It was quite a challenge. Now, a lot of papers are being published, but people seem to forget, is this actually going to make it to the bedside? How good is this? And in the reviewers, you see that not a lot of people have the expertise to actually judge whether something is valuable or not. So it's a complex world right now, but an interesting one as well. And I think this is the moment also for people who want to invest, because there's a lot of people with investment capacity to do that, to invest, because I'm really convinced that healthcare information systems will become better now, and this is where it's gonna be. We will build an intermediate layer that somehow enables the users to better interact with that. And I think also patients will benefit from, I'm convinced that they will benefit from that, and also patient organizations should jump in here.
Especially looking at it from the scientist's perspective, there is always the search for the better model, the better artificial intelligence. And then the clinician is often seen as sort of a passive element. So I build a great model that can predict whatever, can predict everything with greatest accuracy. And okay, at some point the doctor will use it. But in your opinion, would actually be better for real advancements and real application that doctors have a more, and are invited to have to take a more active role, that the doctor says, okay, I need this, and to make it work, I need that this thing works this way. Because with a model, with the best model ever that stays on the computer, it's awesome, it's nice, publishes great, but then I don't use it for my patients.
Absolutely. So I think there's a whole discussion, and interaction with doctors has often been seen the wrong way, in the sense that a lot of doctors are now taking coding classes, they're learning Python, they want to build their own models. And I think that's great, absolutely great. And some of them will be very successful. But I think the more important skill than that, and it can be a way to reach that goal as well, is to learn to communicate with your computer scientist. So you actually need the two groups to be part of one team and communicate with each other and understand each other's challenges. And if a doctor, by taking the courses, will understand the limitations of the models, great, but he will always be an inferior coder. I mean, people who code full-time will always be better coders. So why would you spend energy on that? Try to understand the models, but also try to explain to computer scientists what actually your problems are at the bedside. And on the other side as well, the person that you want to look at is not the guy with the highest IQ. I mean, they're all very smart people, but you need a guy with the highest emotional quotient, probably the one that can talk to doctors, that can understand the complex environment that they're working in, that we're dealing with human beings, that it's never binary, that, the values that you and your family have in the same situation might lead to different decisions than other people's values might lead, especially when it comes to life and death decisions, when it comes to these very critical moments where we have to act fast, we have to make fast decisions, but with severe consequences as well. And consequences that may result into a patient not surviving, into a patient ending up with severe disabilities that he wouldn't have wanted. And also, intensive care medicine is a teamwork. There's nurses, there's physiotherapists, respiratory therapists. There's a whole team of people who all actually want the same. I don't want to lose much time in retrieving my data or getting my data out. I want actionable artificial intelligence. I want to know what would happen if I would do this in this situation in order to improve my interaction with this patient and his family. And so that is that. We had the layer of the startups, but the other layer is the layer where doctors or clinicians and computer scientists come closer to each other and try to understand each other's expertise and each other's challenges. And I think rather than a doctor trying to become a decently good coder. I mean, hire an excellent coder, but someone you can talk to. That would be my advice to anybody who wants to start in this field.
That is really awesome, because we have, from one side, excellent doctors coding.
Yeah.
On the other side, we have great mathematicians who are making codes, but what we miss is the low-tech step.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Someone that can make them talk to each other
absolutely.
and understand each other.
Absolutely. And so we might need psychologists, we might need behavioral scientists to help us in that intermediate layer. Like, we've never thought of, at least we now start thinking of, how will people actually interact with these systems? We just build them and then we suppose that they will make people's life happy, but it's not necessarily the case. Maybe these models were not the models people were waiting for, or if it were the models, maybe the data, the way they present the data, it doesn't help anybody in clinical practice.
And from the patient side, if we can have computer models, artificial intelligence in place and working, what could be the benefit for the patient?
The benefit for the patient would be if these models help the doctors, because time is limited. We are facing immense challenges in healthcare when it comes to nurse shortages, but also doctors shortage, which means that the time of a doctor becomes very precious. And if a doctor is behind the computer screen pulling out your results and at the same time entering data, that is time that he cannot spend talking to you, asking you, look, what kind of a person are you? What are your values in life? Or if I'm maybe talking in the intensive care unit, I might not be able to talk to the patient. I have to talk to the relative. What kind of person was your husband? Was your wife? Would he or she want to live with the disabilities because of the critical illness that she has? That human interaction is immensely important, and we have to take time for that, because that's actually the only thing that matters. The only thing that matters is that we make people's life better, and if we can't, that at least we can get it to an acceptable level for them to have a meaningful life afterwards. And that human interaction somehow, in the shortage of workforce and in the strict times that we have, but also in it's, as I said, the screen behind the doctor and the patient. That is actually problematic, and we should get rid of that. And that is what these systems should do for us.
Before you said you're going to retire in about 15 years, so before you go into retirement, what technology or application you dream to see and use?
So what we have developed here are several models. So my main research line is concerned with traumatic brain injury. Traumatic brain injury being a very complex condition. I mean, we used to think you get a blow on the head and that's it, and then you're in a coma, and then you wake up, and those are the disabilities. It's a very complex disease, and there's a lot of signals in the brain that we now can monitor. The problem is the interaction between that. And worldwide, there's millions of traumatic brain injuries occurring every day. It's a disease that mainly affects young children, young adults, people with a life expectancy way ahead of them. Now, the interpretation of all these signals is very complex, and I would say, I would think about 2,000 people in the world can really call themselves TBI experts, in a sense that they're able to interpret this. Millions of TBIs, 2,000 experts. So it's simply, there's a mismatch there. If we could design systems that would bring this expertise more widely distributed, because putting in probes and measuring signals, it's very interesting, but it won't improve your outcome if I don't act on it. So if we could somehow offer this to a broad, worldwide implementation, where it would work in rich countries, but also in lower middle income countries, where you could have specific models that would actually help doctors to interpret the data, because sometimes the decisions that you can have to make are quite aggressive in terms of therapy, and applying this aggressive therapy too early can damage the patient, too late can also damage the patient. So if that, with all the models that we've developed, and it's about the reaction of the blood vessels, how to optimize brain perfusion, how to predict if some terrible event will happen that you could still prevent, if we could somehow implement that in the next 15 years, maybe not worldwide, but at least in a part of the world, then I would retire happily.
And another important aspect that you just mentioned is that with computer models, if they are of course correctly placed and working, you can bring the doctor to the patient, even if the doctor is not actually there. So could it help to bring advanced functions or advanced insights for patients also in countries that are not the richest and have the best healthcare systems? I mean, we live in Western Europe, but the world goes much beyond that.
Absolutely. And I think that you're touching a very important subject there, because we cannot simply apply the models that we have built here and that work here, because I know that my models, we've done all the homework. Our models work for the purpose they were designed. But if I would translate my model now to a low and middle income country setting, it probably wouldn't, because the situation is different. So another thing that we have neglected is to help these people and build models specifically for their context, because they might not have the same expensive monitors than we have. And if you see now, as I said in the beginning, we have these people at lower technology readiness levels continuing to construct models based on the available data sets. What is well known about these data sets, there's almost no data of people in low and middle income countries in these data sets. And I think it's problematic, because it means that you cannot simply translate the models that they have. And so I believe in that. I truly believe that, and it goes for many, we cannot be expert in everything. And so it goes for many conditions. A colleague in a low middle income countries, but also in a high income setting, might have to take care of a disease that he's maybe a sepsis expert, but at a certain stage, there's a traumatic brain injury entering his unit. And he wants to have the expertise of these 2,000 experts at the bedside as well. And the other way around, a TBI expert who suddenly has to take care of a sepsis patient might need the guidance of one of these sepsis experts in how to manage resuscitation. And I think that is something that we can do. And of course, you can look it up and read a book, but that's again this being on the pull side, and also in a very critical situation where I'm not saying minutes, but at least hours can save lives. Right? So gaining that time in a busy unit is something that is very important. And so coming back to low and middle income countries, the challenge of medical expertise of the bedside is even larger there. Not only the devices and the drugs that they have are limited, but also the number of doctors per capita of a population is less. So I think I'm really convinced that that is a way we could leap forward also in improving healthcare in these settings.
And that is very interesting, and also very interesting the consideration that you don't just take a model here, bring it to another country and expect that works, because it has to be adapted, as you just said, to the technology that is there, to data that are there, because people with different diet, different health issues, different illnesses, of course, that will be a different data set from the data set you may find here, and the model will react differently. So thank you very much, Geert. And thanks also for the hospitality to the University Hospital of Leuven. And as always, I also thank our listeners on Spotify from all over the world. If you enjoy our interviews with world-leading experts on in silico medicine, show us your love by following our accounts on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and also by voting on Spotify. I wish all of our listeners a great day from Leuven, and I wish you, Geert, a great day.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the interview. So it was great to talk, and I hope your listeners were happy with the results.
Of course they will. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.